Hello and welcome to the Racial Equity Webinar Series. I'm Kinkini Banerjee, the Senior Coalitions Relations Manager at USBC, and I'm so glad to have you join us for this session. This bi-monthly series was launched with funding from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation as part of USBC's efforts to create and model a culture of inclusion, diversity, and equity. It's focused on building capacity of the breastfeeding field to apply both an equity lens to inform and guide our strategies and activities, as well as an equity mirror to examine our own coalitions and organizations' internal structures, culture, and policies, and understand how they might be fostering or hampering true inclusion and equity, and ultimately our shared mission of improving the landscape of breastfeeding across the nation. The USBC website houses more than 20 online learning communities on breastfeeding-related topics from the Surgeon General's call to action and beyond. And these learning communities are open to all site users, so please explore and join the communities of greatest interest. We are especially proud of our racial equity learning community. It's rich with resources and a lot of good dialogue as well. So this is part of our learning community. The inclusive learning process is again open to the field. We have a webinar at each odd-numbered month. We have blog posts aligned with the webinar topics. We have a discussion forum as well as a file sharing library and of general readings as well as readings related to the topic of the webinar. So if you're not already a member of our racial equity learning community, I hope you'll join us. And you can either go www.usbreastfeeding.org/equity-community, but if that's harder for you to remember, just go to the website, www.usbreastfeeding.org, and then click on the tab which says News and Info, and that'll open the, you'll scroll down and see a tab for learning communities, and you can scroll down to the one that you want to. So today's handouts and slides will be posted on the learning community and on our website webinar page as well. And Danae is going to put a link to the page on the chat box so you can click and get to it. But it is again usbreastfeeding.org/equity-community. We have many attendees for this session, and participants are currently in listen-only mode, and we encourage you to submit questions at any time during the presentation. So please type your questions in the question box on the webinar control panel. And here's how you do it. You should see a control panel on the right of your screen. If you don't see it, it might be minimized. So click on that orange tab with the white arrow and it'll pop the control panel back out again, and scroll down and you'll see just under the audio tab is the one for questions, and if you click on it, it'll open a text box for you to type your questions in. And during the session, if you have any audio or other technical questions, please email office@usbreastfeeding.org and our staff should be able to help you. And that brings me to today's topic. This webinar will celebrate the release of Kimberly Seals Allers' much-awaited book, The Big Letdown: How Medicine, Big Business, and Feminism Undermine Breastfeeding. Ms. Seals Allers will weave together passages from the book and include timely commentary from her writing and reporting of it. Revealing new themes, she will discuss how unsavory alliances between the medical and scientific fields, combined with federal policies and major forces of structural gaps, capitalist interests, feminist ideology, and rapid industrialization of our food system relentlessly undermine women in their infant feeding decision-making. Ms. Seals Allers will examine the critical undercurrents that need to be considered when advancing and building community and structural support for breastfeeding. Drawing on current events as well as her research, she will share concrete action steps for us all that all of us can take to disrupt the letdown that sabotages women's choices. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Kimberly Seals Allers. She needs no introduction to the first food field, and her CV is distinguished. And I'm going to just give you a little hint of the vast just how much power she brings to the work that she does. Kimberly is an award-winning journalist and a prominent breastfeeding commentator. She currently serves as the director of the First Food Friendly Community Initiative, which is a pilot project in Detroit and Philadelphia funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation to create a national accreditation for breastfeeding supportive community environments. Kimberly was selected as a blog expert for the United States Breastfeeding Committee's project focus on promotion of the federal break times for nursing mothers law. She served as the editorial director of the Black Maternal Health Project of Women's E-News. Her work is extensive and has been featured in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, Daily Beast, CNN, Ladies' Home Journal, the New York Daily News, Real Simple, Fortune magazine, and many, many others. Kimberly worked at Fortune, Essence, and the Times of London before turning to freelance work. She is the author of the Mocha Manual series of books and also the co-author of Giving Notice, Why the Best and Brightest Are Leaving the Workplace. Kimberly's fifth book, The Big Letdown, has been released today, published by the St. Martin's Press. So we are especially honored to have her with us on this big day. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly. Kimberly, you might be muted. Would you unmute your line?
You are so right, Kim Kenny. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. We've got to get an abbreviated bio out there. I am so honored and excited to be here today with USBC and all of you from the coalitions to talk about something that's been, my work for the past probably 2 years, and to really share about my journey and what I've been learning and how this can help us in the work that we're also dedicated to. So thank you so much to USBC for allowing me this opportunity. I'm super excited to be here on the day my book is released. And I'm happy to report that as of noon, it was the #1 new release in its category. So I hope we can keep that momentum going and really get this message out to all women. So today, I'm real excited because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, what's been happening, right? Things that we know, but things that we don't know and things that we may want to make more obvious to the women and men that we work with. I'm going to start today by reading a little bit from the book in the intro, and then we'll dig into the presentation. So here we go. I am driving, speeding down the Grand Central Parkway in Queens, New York, wearing only a black t-shirt and some brightly colored pajama pants tucked into my Uggs. There's a screaming baby in the back seat. Don't worry, she's mine. 13 miles at an unmentionable speed later, I arrive at Long Island Jewish Hospital, where about 6 weeks earlier I delivered my 8-pound, 6-ounce daughter by C-section. After fumbling with the car seat, I grabbed the striped cooler bag from the trunk and moved quickly through the lobby, past the gift shop, and to the elevator bank, refusing to make eye contact just in case any of those judgmental, please shut your baby up types are in the vicinity. At least at the hospital, they may just assume that all the crying is related to a medical problem, not my personal failure. So the ride up the elevator, I switched to swinging, bouncing, and some kind of twirling action, hoping that this will calm my child. It doesn't. Just as the elevator doors slowly part, I see my target and make my move, bolting toward my goal, a large door. I turn the doorknob to the left many times and then to the right. I bang on the door, no answer. This is it. My last-ditch, desperate attempt for help, quickly followed by the grim realization that there is none to be found. That door, that blasted door, is the place where every other week the breastfeeding support group happens. And even though it is not the day or the time, I was hopeful that someone, anyone, would be there and able to help me figure out why I am suddenly and unexplainably failing at breastfeeding. Instead, it is locked, and there is not one lacto-friendly looking person in sight. I reached for that cooler bag. It was given to me when I was discharged from the hospital. There was infant formula in it. Yesterday, it was the devil. Today, it looks like my Messiah in plastic packaging. In the days of my breastfeeding zealousness, I refused to even bring it into the house. But a part of me would not just throw it away. Just toss it, I said to myself. It's a subversive tool of the infant formula companies to undermine your breastfeeding success. I ranted to my then husband, who was never known to turn away any sort of freebie, even a subversive one. But the nice nurse at the hospital has said to take it, quote unquote, just in case. And perhaps this is my just in case. How does she know? I sit there fumbling to make a bottle of formula with one hand while my breast continues to leak. My baby needs to eat, and I am literally oozing food. Make the bottle, feed your baby, I say to myself. It's no big deal. Just as I'm ripping off the packaging, I hear someone asking me if I need some help. It's a blurry facade, but the voice is of an older woman, and when I look up, I see she is wearing a hospital volunteer smock and pin. I blurt out a 2-minute run-on sentence about how my baby won't nurse and she's been crying for hours, and I desperately hope someone from the breastfeeding support group would be here, but no one is, and I don't know what to do. In the midst of my rambling and sobbing, she says, "Wait here." No mention of my dangling breast and the about-to-be-poured formula setup station. She returned with the woman who led our support group. I was rescued that day by a kindly older woman. Her name, I learned, was Alice. And while the lactation consultant helps me hand express some milk to get baby Kayla settled and fed, Alice gets me a cup of water, rubs my back, and tells me her own daughter had a similar experience. In the end, a stranger saves me, not the pediatrician who is technically responsible for my baby's health and nutrition, not the OBGYN who apparently only cares about the contents of my uterus until it is emptied, but not 30 minutes more, not the budget-busting $100 an hour lactation consultant I paid last week who was unable to accommodate me on short notice this week. For the next hour, watching Kayla finally calm, suckling on my breast, looking at me, eyes brown and blazing, I can't help thinking about the past 3 hours and wonder if this is what the experience of feeding our young according to our biological norm is supposed to be like. If breastfeeding is natural and best, then why is it so difficult? Yes, it brings unparalleled moments of joy, but why does it also include so much emotional anguish and suffering? Meanwhile, the messages we receive about breastfeeding are completely disconnected at times from the actual experience millions of women are having. I mean, let's face it, me sitting braless and crying on a hospital floor does not jibe with any photo you have ever seen in any breastfeeding magazine article or advertisement, ever. In the images we are shown, there are green meadows, there are colorful flowers and blissfully calm women. Nobody is crying or cursing or dripping milk on their overpriced sheepskin boots. No women on the verge of breakdowns making over-the-speed dashes for help. But this was me, and I soon learned there are millions more like me. Why in the land where we boast of American exceptionalism do we suck at breastfeeding? And if there is some collective failure among women, is it biological or psychological? Or biological because of a psychological trigger? If I had to create a map of my years of breastfeeding, not just with my first child, but also 4 years later nursing my second, it would show a confusing array of lines running in all sorts of directions, like the streams of light after a firework explodes. Yet all of those lines could never tell the whole story. The map could highlight the warmth and the joy of breastfeeding and that magical connection between me and my child that centered me beyond words. It could possibly pinpoint all the obstacles I ran into at the hospital or at work, but not all the invisible cultural forces causing them. Women deserve to know why we end up angry, confused, and struggling for clear answers. We should really dig deep into the why breastfeeding has become such a polarizing issue, why women find themselves in an information maelstrom when it comes to their infant feeding choices, why a generation of women who are collectively breaking new barriers in business, science, and the arts also battle feelings of inadequacy about their ability to perform their biological imperative, why profit motive and other conflicts of interest often cloud out what is best for baby, and why the policy changes, scientific innovation, and cultural forces that once aided in our collective advancement as women now seem to be spinning in a powerful and dangerous orbit around us, trapping us inwards. The breastfeeding narrative, both historical and present day, is a cautionary tale about maternal bodies, good or bad, and how our bodies are measured and assessed. breastfeeding shows us all the ways as women that we have been imagined, constructed, created, and controlled by economics, science, the media, and other so-called authoritative sources. And since, according to some estimates, 80% of women will become mothers by age 44, we are all affected, childless or not. For the purposes of this book, the letdown refers to the unseen commercial and social underpinnings that leave women frustrated and confused from the early days of motherhood, battling in so-called mommy wars and caught between science wars. Falling back on my journalistic training, I've delved into fields as varied as pediatrics, sociology, history, feminism, economics, and pop culture to better understand the social history and modern influences, some subtle, some blatant, that affect women as infant feeding decision makers every day. I have visited doctors' offices, hospitals, childbirth educators, and corporate offices. I am less interested in the mechanics of letdown within us. I am not a physician or lactation specialist, as I am with the letdown around us. The mother-child dyad is the most basic yet significant biological unit of humankind. And if something is being done to taint it, whether it by deep-pocketed drug companies, then it needs to be thoroughly examined. The outcome has a profound effect on the whole world, from the economics of squandering a irreplaceable resource to the personal and societal cost of compromised infant and maternal health outcomes. Most important, I wanted to know what we can do structurally and as a society and collectively as womankind to ensure that fewer and fewer of us find ourselves speeding down that highway in the years to come. This is what I learned. So that's just an excerpt from the introduction where I really talk about my personal experience and why I was so interested in how we can better understand why women are where they are when it comes to breastfeeding. And I think that has tremendous insight for all of us. So I often say this revolution will not be individualized. And what I mean is that if we don't show that there is something bigger than breastfeeding, that there are bigger issues out there more than just a woman and her personal struggles, then we're not going to make much progress. If we don't show that there is a structural letdown all around us, there are other things that set us up to fail, then we will continue to dangerously, mistakenly view it as a personal failure. And it's not a personal failure. Many times the structures have failed around us. So the letdown around us is really about many things. It's about science, right? It's about medicine. It's about big business, which includes big pharma and big food, right? There's an industrialized food system that we know begins from the very first day we are born. It's also about feminist ideals, and even it's about us, the breastfeeding movement itself, and how we can make changes to make sure our message is more inclusive of everyone. So I often say women don't breastfeed, cultures do. And I say that because when you have the cultural norm of breastfeeding as the normative infant feeding pattern, then you see that women just naturally do it. So what we need and what I offer here is an in-depth cultural examination as a way to change the environment, right? How can we change the environment? Let's look at some of these areas that are affecting women. One, let's start with the medical field. We know that doctors, mostly pediatricians, and OBGYNs are the professionals that women turn to for help. And often they need help themselves, right? They need breastfeeding education. They don't receive this information in medical school. And so what happens? We find that the people that should be there to give the help aren't there at all, right? I'm going to read a little something from that chapter on physicians. Where medical schools have failed to educate, infant formula companies have been more than happy to fill the gap. In the absence of independent medical training, doctors and mothers alike have relied on the commercial industry, the one supplying and profiting from the substitute product, to provide so-called unbiased education and guidance. Every year, the Abbott Nutrition Institute hosts conferences to educate thousands of physicians and nurses on infant nutrition. This is like going to a Toyota car dealer to learn about the benefits of a Buick. Or imagine thousands of licensed dietitians being trained at some McDonald's Nutrition Institute. Women can't be supported by doctors who themselves need support. in receiving independent breastfeeding education. And so a vicious cycle begins. Doctors don't talk much about breastfeeding because they still don't know much about breastfeeding. But not talking about breastfeeding leaves mothers with the perception that their physician is not wholly supportive, which influences their feeding behavior. In turn, mothers likely won't talk much about breastfeeding to a doctor they sense isn't supportive of breastfeeding. In the end, nobody is talking about breastfeeding, right? So that's the danger, that we begin silencing this conversation, mostly starting with the physicians who women rely on for help, right? And instead of us getting support for breastfeeding, what has happened? In the absence of physician support, it's become a big business to women's breasts to really make money around what women can uniquely do. And we find this is going on from big food to big pharma to even when we look at some of the people that we turn to, the American Academy of Pediatrics. In the book, I really talk about their financing and their funding and how, it's a challenge to really look at them for unbiased advice. So all of these interests are being clouded by commercial interests, and we know that when you're in a situation where profit motive comes first, there's little room for babies. I did some research and had a lot of fun looking at some analyst reports and really had a good time looking back into tools that we use as business journalists, but really digging into some of the inside information about Mead Johnson and listening to some of his calls with Wall Street analysts and the things that he promotes and how they look at the infant formula business. So here's one interesting quote that I wanted to share. So this one is very troubling for me because, as you can see, he is noting that an improvement in unemployment will help reduce breastfeeding, right? So the idea that because, he clearly knows that breastfeeding and work are challenges and still reduce the breastfeeding duration, even though there are many efforts out there to help that, he is counting on women getting more jobs and not being unemployed as something that will reduce the breastfeeding rate. This is literally what he says on the call. So they are clearly aware of the barriers and they are exploiting them for their own profit gain. He also mentions how of all the women who give birth in the U.S., we have the names and addresses of approximately 70% of them in advance. So that's a fantastic asset. Well, I guess it would be. I wonder if these women know that they have their information in advance. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's received an unsolicited advertisement from one of the infant formula marketers, right? And so the way that they talk about women as assets and having this information, he goes on to say about, in this same analyst call, he talks about how they could better use that information. And this one is particularly troubling because he really wants to be a disruptive innovator in the world, and he feels like these ideas are important and these strategies can be similar whether you sell infant formula or you sell beer. Now, I would like to think that there's a big difference on many, many levels, including ethical considerations from how you want to sell infant formula or how you sell beer. But these are the ways that big, companies view infants and mothers, not as people that need to be looked out for their infant health, but really more like profiting marketing tools. And so it becomes a really important question about profits versus profiteering, right? Like, we know infant formula companies must exist, and we know that they need to exist for the mothers who need them, right? But at what point are the profits that they make, do the profits that they make require strategies that really border on profiteering, right? How far is too far? How much is too much? And what do these companies really have to do to maintain these, really high year-over-year revenue growth percentages? This is a really important education that we have to start talking about. One of the things that we know they use is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? We know that this is a old business strategy going back to IBM, where the idea that if you could create fear and doubt in your customer's mind, that you could actually be successful in your marketing. We know this was exactly what the tobacco companies used in their bid, right, for years. And we have the, years later, we all saw that smoking gun email that said doubt is our product. The idea that if you can create doubt, then you can actually convince people that they may need your product. So we know for years the tobacco companies aggressively sought to create doubt that smoking could kill you or wouldn't kill you, even though they knew that they did. What did they do? Well, many things that are similar to what we see in infant formula companies. They fund science. They create their own institutes that have very, kind of professional sounding names, but really have an agenda. They, make sure that they continue to fund research. One of the things we see that's going on, not just in infant formula, but also broader in the food industry, is this dangerous ingredient marketing, right? We know that this ingredient issue is really dangerous because it promotes the idea that if you have one thing, then things are going good. So we've all seen these bars or these, whether it is a granola bar, whatever, and they'll say, oh, it has fiber, but doesn't mention how much sugar they added, right? Or they say, we've got this one ingredient, and no mention of all the salt they've added. So again, this idea that you can market ingredients solely is one of the tools that infant formula companies have used. And we know that having an ingredient versus how it is processed is very different, right? Getting fiber from a granola bar and getting fiber naturally from foods are two different things. And this idea that the formula companies have been successful by marketing ingredients without any discussion of how those ingredients are processed, what they have to do to make them. One process involves rocket fuel is a very dangerous strategy that women are falling prey to. So we really want to start talking about these larger themes that are not just about infant formula, but about food in general, and really make these connections to women. So that brings us really to talking about science, because, women are in a science storm. I don't know about you, but every day on the news, there's a new study that says this, new study that says that. And it's a very dangerous environment because many people take these studies and use them. I have one girlfriend, and whatever the study says is the latest diet, she's going to be on it, no question. And so what is happening when we look at an age where people are becoming more relying on science? I'm going to read a little bit from that chapter about scientific breakthroughs. There it says, parents are increasingly relying on science to help guide their decision-making about everything from nutrition and vaccinations to social development and preventive health measures. Yet when parents turn to science for evidence that infant formula is inferior, they find a confusing landscape of information that has been muddled by faux science, questionable funding sources, inconsistent research methodologies, outdated protocols, and the media's hunger for the next provocative breakthrough headline. This search for science is another byproduct of the structural and economic forces that undermine breastfeeding. When breastfeeding is extremely difficult because of the structural barriers, parents feel that the preponderance of scientific evidence that breastfeeding is superior must be indisputable to justify the time, effort, and potential shaming involved. With that in mind, the infant formula companies have a vested interest in keeping the scientific landscape muddled by industry-sponsored studies and questionable protocols that lead to sensational anti-breastfeeding headlines. In the end, science is yet another source of unclear information for mothers, letting them down. And so we see this happening all around us, right? And that people don't really understand what science is. They think that, when you see a study, it's definitive, whereas most scientists will tell you that, science is a journey. And the whole thing is about asking questions and moving science forward is what science is, the process of discovery, right? So we really have to help our mothers better understand science, right? We have to help them better understand science. I'm going to read a little bit more. The truth is there's good science and bad science, but often bad or questionable science lands in the same credible science category simply because it is called a study. Are there weak pro-breastfeeding studies? Absolutely, but that weakness is usually in the methodology, such as the sample size, and typically not because it was funded by a for-profit company with a vested interest in a certain outcome. Unfortunately, many of us don't have the know-how to properly unpack the research before us. What we do have are attention-grabbing headlines or the assertion that a news item about a research study was most shared on Facebook. In this environment, important distinctions and gaping research holes get lost in the media clamor about provocative findings. Important questions about the kind of study or how it was conducted often fall to the wayside and placed in favor of a flashy headline, even when the research is flimsy. We may think the latest research means better research, but in doing so, we are throwing out the bathwater of years of scientific evidence in favor of one new baby. And so what we see is a number of times, even in our work, that we've seen these sensational breakthrough headlines. You may recall one in 2014, the quote-unquote sibling study by Cynthia Colan, Ohio State University. It was really interesting for me to dig deep into the study, into all the footnotes, and really look at some of the interesting findings that people were unaware of in the study. For one, 32% of the mothers in Colan's sample smoked during pregnancy. 43% said they drank during pregnancy. There are a number of interesting findings that I lay out in that chapter to show that there's a lot of more information that really mothers don't know about, but need to know, but instead have fallen for those sensational headlines that said breastfeeding benefits were overstated. Somewhere else in the footnotes, there was something about all siblings don't have to be biological, which was something that really should have been mentioned high up front. And so we see that in this headline-grabbing world, science is becoming more and more confusing, and this is part of the work we have to do to really educate mothers on how they can better understand the study. I want to read a little bit about something that was really bothersome for me in terms of, specifically related to this colon study and many others. So I wrote, the most problematic aspect of the study is the author's questionable assumption that all sibling pairs were born in and developed in the same environment where nothing was different, whether they were breastfed or not. Anyone who has multiple children can tell you that from the arrival of one child to the next, life circumstances can be very different. Parental employment, health, and marital status all change, and thus so do priorities, stress levels, and other factors. Let's look at the experience of my two children, who are 4 years apart. Even though both were breastfed exclusively for at least 12 months, what happened after the breastfeeding period was very different for each child. For example, I freelanced and worked at home until my first child, my daughter, was 3 years old. That means that after being weaned, my daughter ate mostly homemade food that I dutifully prepared with fresh and organic ingredients in my kitchen. I had time to devote to cooking nutritious family meals. She also had my undivided attention for reading, music lessons, play dates, and other developmental activities. By the time my son arrived, our family financial situation dictated that I return to work after taking off 1 year, the maximum time my company would hold my job. After my son's breastfeeding period and I returned to work, my son was in the care of a nanny. I did not prepare homemade baby foods the way I wanted to and the way I used to. I simply did not have the time. He certainly ate more store-bought baby foods. In fact, the whole family ate differently. And while I did my best to find a caregiver who agreed to follow the strict schedule I left for reading, music, playtime, and limiting television, I was not in control of his daily activities. So I am completely aware that my second child's lived experience was very different than that of my first, and it didn't have anything to do with breastfeeding. This is the nature of life. Anytime we are comparing siblings over an extended period of time beyond the breastfeeding years, it is unfair and slightly irresponsible to conclude that the reason for any difference in their health or development outcomes should be attributed to breastfeeding alone or examined only within the breastfeeding context. And so we see that this is exactly what has been happening with our studies, being misconstrued and us not having the way to really help mothers make their way through. Even worse, because as we see more industry-funded science, this science is being used to make policy. I mean, I'm sure we're all very interested about this B24 USDA guidelines and slightly concerned what type of research is being used to actually make these decisions. We found recently with the USDA guidelines for adults that there's lots of concern from nutritionists and others in the food space that these new recommendations were based on industry-funded research that reduced the recommendations for eggs and things like that because of how much the dairy industry is involved. So we see bad science being used as a foundation to now make bad policy. This is all very dangerous, and part of the big letdown that women are entering in, unbeknownst to themselves. And so in the end, women use science as what I call the weapon of mom destruction. They're battling each other using these headlines as a way to defend their position, defend the choices that they think they have but were actually forced into, and it becomes a dangerous situation. Another danger we see is this danger of becoming a pump nation. Even though we know that pumping is very important and it helps mothers who have to go to work, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that mothers need to be valued for the mothering work that we do, and that we cannot continue to separate the value of the milk away from the value of the mother providing the milk, and that we really don't want to forget that that is an important fight as well, that we actually have time to mother, and that our mothering work gets valued in the same way that our actual milk product does, right? So I had the privilege to go to MIT for the first ever breast pump hackathon. And it was a really cool experience because, I think I'm old and I didn't really know what a hackathon was. And it was an exciting time to be in this huge room where scientists and engineers and people, mechanical engineers and all types of engineers were there really to try to figure out how to make the breast pump a, more humane experience. In fact, the actual title was called Make the Breast Pump Not Suck. And I thought that was pretty awesome. But while I was there, I had a very interesting epiphany, right? So there, I'm going to read a little bit about my time there, and then we'll move on. So new design ideas range from changing the pump from a vacuum to a more comfortable compression model and integrating massaging technology from the sex toy industry to a hands-free prototype. Others attempted to hack the experience of breastfeeding, with one group hoping to demedicalize the process by adding knitted cozies for the breast pump, making it soft and warmer for the woman's body. But standing in that room that day, with the smell of creativity pulsating, it all came back to me. The trauma and the shame of my own pumping experiences, the Madonna-shaped cone-like flanges, the see-through tunnels that give you the pleasure of seeing your nipples being sucked shapeless, and that dreadful sound, that sound. My first introduction to the experience of breast pumps came in 2000 when my daughter was born. Before she was fully one day old, she started running a fever and I had to be put into the NICU, all 8 pounds of her. I remember slowly rolling my IV stand and my still sore from C-section self to a cold, sterile room with the cinder block walls and only a long brown table in it. There, I hooked myself up to an industrial breast pump, boxy and bigger than a microwave for what felt like hours, only to produce what looked like puny, insufficient droplets of milk. During those minutes, I prayed fervently, rabidly to the milk god, whatever lacto goddess of Greek or pagan origins there was or might possibly be in the expansive universe. It was traumatizing. It was like I had a great fever that could only be cooled by the sight of my milk freeing slowly into that bottle and becoming ounces, meaningful ounces. The line marks on that bottle taunted me, and I desperately wanted everything about that experience to be different from how it was. I never touched a breast pump again. That was until my son came 4 years later. And I talk about how, I had to, because I went back to work earlier, I still pumped, even in my office, and remember that sound and how I would turn on the radio to drown out the sound. And while the hackathon made me excited about the long overdue marriage of innovation and breast pumping, there was definitely a twinge of sadness. Why hadn't we demanded this sooner? Why have we accepted this subpar experience? We have run thousands of miles and won way too much pink to bring attention to improving breast cancer research and care, and rightly so. We've insisted that our slimming undergarments be as close to sexy as possible. But this? Why not this? We have settled on the most horrible experience when it comes to feeding our babies human milk, and we didn't bother to fuss. This made me incredibly sad, incredibly sad. Pumping as it is right now is not the happy medium. It is not the perfect way to balance breastfeeding and work demands. It is not part of the liberation we are seeking. Pumping is often just another trap in the ongoing maze of breastfeeding. another element of the experience that can be extremely stacked against us. Yet more and more women are being pushed to pump as more companies offer IKEA-like nursing rooms and more pumping perks, which is great. But having more time off would actually allow moms to properly establish their breastfeeding routine and extend the time of breastfeeding at the breast before transitioning to pumping. When mothers are returning to work 2 and 3 weeks after childbirth, many don't bother to start breastfeeding and others stop too soon because the barriers seem insurmountable. So we have to remember that pumping is great, but we can't stop fighting for more. We can't stop fighting for more. So another area that we look into in the book is what I call the feminist fallacy. It's really important because one of the things that, and I often say when talking about the feminist movement, that in their well-regarded and much-needed push for us to be equal to men, that they forgot the things that make us uniquely women, like birth and breastfeeding. Those things were suppressed as an unintended consequence. And now we're dealing with that. Some women view breastfeeding and having a child dependent on you as something that is beneath us as modern day women, right? But dependency is not something that is beneath us. Dependency happens, whether you are old or young or disabled. It is not a crime against womanhood. It is just life. And so we really want to start reframing some of these ideas so that we can have a more broader view of feminism, and most importantly, include breastfeeding, right? The ultimate connection between breastfeeding and feminism is that in a truly equitable society, women would have the capacity to pursue the productive and reproductive work without penalty. In that vein, breastfeeding becomes the perfect lens to see the misogyny of our culture as it impacts mothers. Women are harassed and shamed and illegally evicted from public spaces for breastfeeding. Women are threatened with losing custody of their children for breastfeeding too long. Women are ridiculed and bullied for trying to pump at work. Women are described as freak shows for breastfeeding twins or tandem feeding. Women are called names for breastfeeding. Women are told they are sexually abusing their children for breastfeeding. Women are told they're not allowed to keep their breast milk in communal fridges because it's viewed as a bodily secretion and not as food. Women are bullied into stopping breastfeeding because breasts are the sexual objects of men. Women are told it is obscene to breastfeed in front of other people's children. Women are instructed to throw blankets over themselves and their babies if they wish to breastfeed outside the home. The list goes on. This is not the result of some peculiar sensitivity toward babies and small children eating. This does not happen with bottle feeding. This is unique to breastfeeding, and it is about policing women's bodies and their lives. You know exactly the kinds of things feminists used to get riled up about. The fact that women are harassed and shamed for doing something that women's bodies do as a routine part of bearing children is a severe societal flaw that should trouble all feminists. More importantly, we have to start reframing breastfeeding as a reproductive right. We've been really focused in the reproductive rights conversation, a conversation that is coming back right now, and it is very important that we make sure breastfeeding is included as a reproductive right. Too many times the reproductive right movement has been solely focused on how to not get pregnant, how to end a pregnancy if you have one. And those are very important goals, but we cannot forget those who actually want to exercise their reproductive rights and then exercise their right to feed as the completion of the reproductive cycle. And so as this conversation now is emerging about women's rights, and we are working together and having amazing conversations about how to bridge barriers, it is equally important that we make sure that breastfeeding is viewed as a reproductive right, as something that women do as the final part of the reproductive process, and should be included in those rights as we fight for them. And so as breasts move from food to fun, we know that this has become even more challenging because men have, and Madison Avenue, the advertisers have taken over our breasts, using them to sell everything from chicken wings to beer, but allowing women to be shamed and harassed for using them to feed. And we have to do something about that, right? One of the things I think is really important is that breastfeeding feels good, and we don't talk about that, right? We have allowed breastfeeding to be in the language of cracked nipples and pain and hurt and, oh my God, but we've been afraid to say that breastfeeding feels good. Breastfeeding releases oxytocin, which is an amazing calming hormone that is also released during orgasm. But because the sexualization of the breast, we've been afraid to say that breastfeeding can feel good, because any good feelings that come from your breast must be associated with the man. Any painful feelings from your breast are assigned to your baby. This is backwards, and it's unacceptable, and we really have to do better to begin to talk about to women, not just about the sacrifices of breastfeeding and not just the medical benefits, but what it can do for you emotionally, right? What is the message that we can give to them about how it helps them feel good emotionally? I know for me, even when I was working, coming home and having that evening nurse with my son was just the best thing to help calm me and center me at the end of the day. But we have to talk about breastfeeding as a pleasurable experience. And as I discussed in the book, many of these elements around sexualization of our breasts and the feminist movement have prevented us from putting this message out there, and we really need to work against that. Moving on, the problem of breast is best. You know, breast is best are three very powerful words. They're seemingly clear, they're simple and to the point, factually accurate, absolutely, but speaks only to really the benefits of human milk. And this ignores the experience that many women have. Yes, breast is best, but breastfeeding in an environment with all of these structural barriers is really difficult. And so having a simple message makes it confusing for women, because then they feel like personal failures when they aren't able to do it. And this also leads to the infighting and things like that. So important for us, and I talk about this a lot, is how do we separate the act of breastfeeding from the experience of breastfeeding, right? When women say breastfeeding is hard, are they talking about the act? Are they literally talking about putting their nipple inside an infant's mouth? Or are they talking about the experience of breastfeeding? And I think we've been focused very much on the act of breastfeeding, focused on the milk and the benefits, but not really focusing on the experience of breastfeeding, which is where women really struggle. And so we really have to look at how do we now begin to talk about and prepare women for the experience of breastfeeding. How do we help them be prepared for that, so that we know that we're giving them the real talk about their experience? And then what about us? What can we do? What can we do as organizations and nonprofits, as lactation professionals? How do we lead this conversation, not with fear, not with dread, but with a vision, right? And not that we're giving them a scary message, but we're really trying to empower them and showing them that this is where they can be involved with leading for widespread societal change. This is really important. I talk a lot about what we can do as a movement to really get the message right and really move things forward. And so at the end of the book, I outlay a 7-point plan. I won't share them all with you, and mostly for the sake of time as well. But, you know, policy, number 4 is policy, because policy is important, right? But so are people. And so we can't forget about people, and that there's a disconnect where our policies are not rooted in the real experience of women's lives, then we are not going to be successful, even with policies, right? Because we look at the UK. They have 6 months, I believe even a year of time off, and their breastfeeding rates are still not impressive, right? So it's not always just about the policy. They have the maternity leave that we dream of and want and long for, and they still don't have the rate. So there's something else going on, and we have to be thinking about what is it that people really need. Okay, so that's one of number 4 that I talk about in the chapter. And also number 6 is lactation may be biological, but breastfeeding is behavioral. Breastfeeding is behavior. Remember I said that cultures actually spark breastfeeding behavior. And so we have to ask ourselves, how much more do we need to know about the actual lactation process and what milk is made of versus really understanding women, right? How are we increasing our knowledge of understanding the behaviors of women? How do they actually make decisions? What moves them? What motivates them? What inspires them? What gets them engaged? And I would love to see us really put some of our efforts into looking at breastfeeding as a behavioral science and not just as a lactation science or a medical field, because breastfeeding is behavioral. And the most important thing for the way forward is equity, right? We talk about this all the time, and how we need to really make sure, first of all, that as the leaders of the breastfeeding movement, however you define that the leadership is equitable itself, and that it does not continue to reflect the disparities in in breastfeeding rates are also the disparities in breastfeeding leadership. So we've all been seeing such great strides in this area, and we don't want to take our foot off the gas in terms of really pushing to make equity number one. We really want to understand that, and this is also really important when it comes to understanding the behaviors, right? What is it that women of color really need? Is it more education and information about the benefits of breast milk, or is it empowerment? A lot of our work with Black Breastfeeding Week has been focused on empowering women, making them feel like they can, bringing in the family, you know, really trying to put forth the message around this is something about self-determination and empowerment. And we talk very little about benefits because we know that we can really connect with them on an emotional level, which goes back to what I'm saying about become Nike, right? You know that Nike has figured out a way to inspire us. I always talk about those commercials about running a marathon. I know I will never run a marathon. I thought about it and it never happened. But I love the commercials and I go buy the shoes because one day maybe I will. I'm inspired, right? And so we know that there's a way to inspire women to overcome obstacles, that we don't have to play the easy game with them anymore, that we can say, listen, this is difficult. I'm going to show you why. But yet, this is why you're going to feel so good after you accomplish this goal. Talk to them about other challenges they've had in their life, whether it was going to school, going to college, getting some sort of certification, you know, whatever it could be. Ask them how they felt when they overcome that challenge, right? The feeling you have after a challenge is not because it was easy or because it was difficult and you did it. This is what we need to tap into. Become their Nike, and then let them know that you will be their running shoes to help them get there, right? That's what we want to do. And particularly as we're working with more women of color, we need to understand that this is critical for us to move the needle forward. The other thing that's really important in discussing equity is just, as we talked about feminism and physicians, that the experience of being a woman of color when you're dealing with physicians and you're dealing even with the notions of feminism are very different for women of color. So we don't want to assume that all of these ideas can work. We know that historically there's been a relationship with the physician community that may have caused distrust at this time, you know, because of certain very rampant government tests and medical tests that were done on African Americans. We have the example of Henrietta Lacks and the syphilis experiment. So we know that sometimes overly relying on physicians may not be the best strategy for working to really, when we're trying to work with women of color. And so we have to think about that. We also know that there's a difference between feeling interpreted and being understood, right? We don't want to go off and say, I've read all these studies about women of color, and I've read this study and that study about women of color, so now you feel like you can interpret them. Because really what they need is understanding. And so we don't want to make a difference. We want to be sure that we know the difference between being interpreted and being understood. And our goal is to try to understand the experiences of all women. And so ultimately, the solution is going to be in the source. Why do I say that? Well, I'm going to end with a story of a man named Howard Moskowitz, because I think his work is a great idea. Howard Moskowitz became famous because he was hired by Campbell's Soup, the makers of the Prego spaghetti sauce, when they were struggling against ragu, right? Like ragu was the dominant sauce, and Moskowitz was brought in. He was a marketing science genius. He had worked with Pepsi around finding the right formula, and they asked him to fix the Prego problem. And, you know, Moskowitz's aha moment is especially relevant to our topic of breastfeeding, because he realized that most Americans fall into one of three groups. Either you like your spaghetti sauce plain, spicy, or extra chunky. But this extra chunky discovery was particularly significant because at the time you could not find extra chunky on the shelves of the supermarket. And so Prego reformulated their sauces and came out with a line of extra chunky sauces that immediately and completely took over the spaghetti sauce business, earning them like over $600 million in the next 10 years, right? So this was revolutionary because it showed the food industry that they didn't really understand their consumers and had been approaching them all wrong. And Moskowitz, as he transformed spaghetti sauce, knew that companies worked off the flawed premise that you need to ask a consumer what he or she wants. But he realized that consumers didn't actually know what they wanted. They didn't know that chunky spaghetti sauce was their preference until someone gave it to them. Their choices were based on what they knew, what they had in front of them. And I'm convinced that our approach to motherhood and breastfeeding has been equally flawed strategically. Women only see the options in front of them, whether that's breast or infant formula or work or no work, right? And as society, we have yet to show them the chunky. We've got to show them something new. We have to reimagine and create something new and create that new chunky, something that they haven't seen. And this is our work, to go out there, to reimagine the world, and to go make it happen. We did it before, and we can do it again. Again, we don't want women to only feel that they have the options right in front of them. We want to show them that breastfeeding is bigger than breastfeeding. It's bigger than our bodies. Breastfeeding is about corporate interests. And when we have these conversations and take the actions to back it up, then we can do it. Then my daughter and your daughter and our future generations of our daughters will be let down no more. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. What a powerful presentation, and what an expert weaving of the forces that at work that undermine breastfeeding. And this, grim tapestry should galvanize us to action. And I'm going to read out some questions here. So we have, how does feminism hurt breastfeeding again? Feminism is fighting for women's right to feed in public without shame and for women's right to choose what they want to do with their body, whether it's breastfeeding or bottle feeding. Can I get a little bit more clarification on the point? Asked Laura Martinez. Kimberly, you might be muted again.
It looks like she got disconnected. I'll go ahead and just shoot her.
Okay. So as we're waiting for Kimberly to get back on.
Here I am. I'm so sorry.
Wonderful. Do you want me to ask the question again?
Yes, thank you so much. I apologize.
Would you expand a little bit more about how feminism, in the way that it has been also undermining breastfeeding efforts? Out here it says, feminism is fighting for women's right to feed in public without shame and women's right to choose. Could you expand a little bit about how this is impacting or not impacting our breastfeeding goals?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, I think that one of the things that I'm going to put on my webcam, which is what we were going to do for Q&A. Let's see how I do that. Let's see if this works. People can see me. Great. Oh, my hair needs to be tidier. All right. So one of the things that it's been really interesting to think about the feminist movement. I mean, they really have not been embracing breastfeeding messaging because they view it as one of those areas that define good or bad mothers. And they don't, want to get involved with those types of conversations where mothers are pitted against each other. But I believe that is short-sighted because they're looking at that without thinking about who actually sold us those ideas, right? Those were things that were peddled by male-dominated industries, including big pharma and the medical field. Those were not things that came from women themselves. And so we definitely see that we need to kind of expand the feminist perspective, particularly as it relates to reproductive rights, to make sure that breastfeeding is included in the spectrum of reproductive rights.
Thank you, Kimberly. And this is a quote I'm quoting from your book. It's not an accident that big business is interested in what we eat on the very first day of life. The collusion of medical needs, parenting trends, and the historical undermining of women provided business and marketing opportunities. And we do see a lot of it, the structural, but how much the industry has taken advantage of the gaps that we have over here.
Yes, yes, so true.
And more comments here. Brava, thank you so much for this work, says Ann Davis. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for the differentiation of breast milk versus the behavior of breastfeeding, says Cheryl. And then can you speak about in the effort to tackle the big letdown that breastfeeding families face, what are some tips for white women to be allies in the effort to address racial disparities in breastfeeding?
Well, I think my biggest tip to white women who want to be allies is for you all to have that conversation and figure out how you can best be allies. I think there are some amazing resources out there, both from women of color and, other white women. And so I think that's something that needs to be kind of self-generated, and so that it's authentic and so that it feels like it can get buy-in from others. One of the things that has always been, kind of one of the things that I do talk about is kind of knowing when to lead and knowing when to get out the way and let others lead and being okay with that. So we have to kind of be able to do that. But certainly, I would love to see, and we continue to see this happening, really white women who are interested in this conversation, taking it on and doing the work themselves to come up with some solutions.
Thank you. And then again, we have a question about what's the name of your book, and it's The Big Letdown, How Medicine, Big Business, and Feminism Undermine Breastfeeding, and it's just been released today by St. Martin's publication. And I think so many of the concepts that you laid out today, Kimberly, of normalizing breastfeeding, women don't breastfeed, cultures do, and this is so critical. So could you share a little bit about your work with the first food friendly communities that you're working with? We'd love to hear more about the pilot projects.
Yeah. So excited about this project, and I'm trying to get everything together so I can share it with the field, because I hope that you all are as blown away as I have been blown away these past 2.5 years. My goal was really trying to create a community-powered solution, right? Like how one of my other things that I always say is whatever the question, the answer is in the community. And so instead of us looking into other areas, whether it's evidence-based or doctors, what about the community, right? The community, I believe, had the skills and the knowledge to save themselves. And my job, I feel, is to just go there and leverage it. We create the tools and the mechanisms, but we leverage the community to save itself. And we don't come in as outsiders looking to do the work. So that's a key component of kind of the philosophy behind 3FCI. What we found, and I don't know if we've just been incredibly lucky, Kidada and I talk about this all the time, or we've created something truly magical, but in our project, first we do a community assessment. We hire community residents to participate in surveying, and we go out and ask the community, what do you think would help you? We don't go there with a plan. We allow the community to tell us what they think would work. Again, they know their neighborhood best. They live there. They may have seen mothers breastfeeding or trying to breastfeed. They may know people who have attempted it. First, we survey, and that's a broad surveying process. Everybody, men, we ask fathers, we ask others. I hope that you all have seen one of my 3FCI presentations, where I share specific findings from that surveying process. We use those findings now to inform a proprietary curriculum that Kidada Green from the Black Mothers Breastfeeding Association developed, where we then again hire residents, people who live in the community. We bring them in. We put them in a 3-day training using the proprietary curriculum that Kidada has created, where we go through with them different things about breastfeeding, different things about the community, different things about themselves. After that, they actually figure out what they think will work. They design their own interventions, and then they spend 3 weeks in a paid internship part-time executing those interventions. Now, at the same time that they're getting this internship, we partner with someone who's giving them job skills training. They were learning, they got other certifications in our Philly project, from CPR to, medical billing. They were in an employment program. And so we are making this important connection, because when we go to low-income communities, and we're talking about breastfeeding, but many women are struggling to figure out how they're going to feed their families, how they're going to feed their children. We can't keep talking about breastfeeding and ignoring the fact that, economic pressure is real. The economic pressure is real, and we know that that type of stress will literally prevent you from breastfeeding successfully, right? We know that. And so continually talking about breastfeeding without dealing with the social stressors, to me, is not a good strategy. So we really wanted to create something that also deals with social stressors. So what we found in both our projects, these women, so they're getting this training, they're having their interviewing skills polished. Meanwhile, they're going out, they're talking to businesses, they're getting businesses to display a breastfeeding is welcome here sign. They're meeting with their local politicians. They are out there getting restaurants to create nursing spaces. They are talking to their neighbors. And what we have found, the biggest thing, and I'm actually giving myself goosebumps, I hope you could see that, is what these women said, and I can't wait till we get to share these videos, about how they felt about themselves after the experience, right? And so the way that we empowered them, that they now could go on interviews, that they now felt comfortable talking to their neighbors, that was more important to them. Now, secondary is they are now hooked on breastfeeding for life, because breastfeeding ultimately gave them that great experience. They are breastfeeding ambassadors for life, and they will talk about it to anybody, on the clock or off the clock. But we have created an experience where breastfeeding has been shown not to just to be good for the infants and for the mothers, but it is good for their lives. And breastfeeding helped them have an experience that has changed them. And I just can't wait to share these stories from women and what they've said about how the 3FCI internship and being in their community, helping mothers on that level, really did something for them personally, and in turn for their community. And that's what we're super excited about sharing. And would love to talk more about that perhaps at another webinar.
Thank you, Kimberly. And as you said, this is so much more than breastfeeding. It's building resilient, healthy communities. For those of you, Kimberly did a phenomenal presentation on this in the California Breastfeeding Summit last year, and we might be able to get you a link to the recording of that. I hope that's available. We'll put that on our resource list out here and float it in the discussion section too. And for our participants today, Dr. Bartik and group study article on health outcomes from racial ethnic disparities in breastfeeding is in the February issue of the Journal of Pediatrics, and it's available free until March 15th. And Danae is going to post the link for that. We hope you'll see that, for many of us who ask why does race matter in this? I do my work, I treat everyone the same. Breastfeeding is so much more than that. The barriers are so profound for so many groups. And as Kimberly said, the wisdom is in the community. So for those of us asking, how do we reach the communities? How do we work with the communities? Ask the people, ask the folks in the community. For every question we have, they have the answers. So again, thank you. I'm scrolling through more questions, lots of comments here. Again, fantastic presentation. Would love to hear more. And then can you speak about big business trying to control donor human milk?
Yeah, that's a very key area. I mean, this is something that when you step back from it, we talked about the business of our breasts, right? So this is a key area where the business of our breasts is getting even more lucrative, and we're seeing a lot more players coming in. Also, interestingly to note, many of these new players are led by companies that are white men. So we don't want to perpetuate what we're trying to, get away from now in the human milk space, number one. Number two, I talked a little bit about this idea of separating the value we have as mothers versus the product we create, right? So, me as a mother really has no value, doesn't have much value in this country. Okay, I could pay somebody else to take care of my kid, but nobody will pay me. They won't even allow me to put money away and pay myself later to take care of my child, right? So the mothering is not valued for us to do it for our own children. Now, that person that we hire has value, and we have to make sure they pay their taxes. So again, we see a distorted value system. When I talk about the value of motherhood in the book, around mothering and that aspect of work versus the milk product. And so in the human milk field, we're seeing a high valuation for the actual product. And so we just want to be clear or be careful that could become very dangerous. Now, we know that human milk is very necessary. In fact, it is really important that in this country that we change the conversation around human milk. I mean, it is not about breast milk, a mother's milk versus infant formula. It really should be a mother's milk, donated human milk, and then infant formula, right? So we have to really make sure that we kind of get that donor human milk in a secondary position. Now, what will it take to get us there? Right now, we have such limited supply, which drives up the price and makes it only accessible to the sickest infants, the ones that need it most. But what if we increase the supply, and then it could become something that is more, that could be seen as more useful for other mothers. Some of you may know I was working with some really great people to talk about Flint and really getting donor human milk to those mothers instead of them being given infant formula, right? And this idea that we could actually mobilize to make sure that those infants, particularly among mothers who were breastfeeding, that they could receive donor milk just for that period while they were being tested or whatever that process is called where the lead is getting out your body, was a great opportunity to practice equity in donor human milk. Now, unfortunately, it didn't really happen. But certainly there, we have to start acting in this scarcity mode. This is another thing I've been talking about in the book, like this idea that everything is scarce. We have to believe that it's enough and that if we put out the call, women will respond. But it was that scarcity thing that drives up the price, that prevented mothers in Flint from getting milk, from donor human milk that would have been great for their babies, and keeps us in this environment where our milk is more valuable than we are. And so I think that there's a whole upside down economic system there. It's going to take a lot of work to upend, but we should certainly keep an eye on it and be careful about who is leading that work and that commercialization.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly. And then another question says, with your expertise in marketing strategies and communication strategies, what ideas do you have for us to be making our messages become more like Nike?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I try to share a little bit about that. Like, how do we connect to that great feeling? How often are we telling women that breastfeeding feels good? How often are we being honest? We have to tell them the truth. We have to say, listen, breastfeeding is hard. I'm not going to lie to you, okay? But you're going to feel so good after you do it because it's hard, right? Instead of trying to tell them it's not hard, and then when they find it difficult, they quit because they think something is wrong with them because we didn't tell them the truth. So the most important thing we have to do is tell them the truth. Like, it's going to be difficult. Even begin to prepare them properly for the hospital experience. Like, look, somebody's going to come in. They're going to tell you need to rest. They're going to try to take your baby. You're going to say you want. Like, we have to tell them the truth because it's the experience that trips women up. When they're sitting there and they're like, what happened to my baby and why was it given formula and why is she saying this? And we have to tell them the truth. And so that's the beginning of empowering them, is by being honest with them about the difficulties of the challenges of breastfeeding, but having faith in them that they can do it, right? Again, help them see other challenges they face in their life. Help them understand that, we have been told that we can sweat and bind ourselves up and tattoo ourselves for beauty or for fitness, but we have been told and sold a message that we should not be uncomfortable for our babies. That's not okay. That's something we've been sold. And so really be honest with them about how we can better understand why they may feel the way they feel and why breastfeeding may look the way it looks to them. That's what we can do. And so I think the most critical part is the conversation that we can have and really trying to build a relationship with them and really understanding that that conversation becomes a relationship. And so we really want to kind of work on that really as a starting point, and then encourage them, empower them, tell them it feels good, show them what's going to do for their baby, show them what's going to do for them, show them the benefits in terms of, hey, breastfed children are generally healthier, and you're likely to miss less days of work. That is very important in families that are already, economically fragile. You really have to make these bigger connections to their life and not just to the benefits of the milk.
Thank you, Kimberly. The bigger connections to life, again, so critical. And thank you to the so many coalitions now working with organizations like Public Citizen to do the ban the bags, things like when Public Citizen publishes that report, in USA Today, people sit up and take notice. And for the many advocates who are working towards doing banning the bags and reducing the influence of formula marketing, we have, again, coalitions and advocates working towards issues of paid leave and things. Breastfeeding doesn't happen in a vacuum, and so all of these have to do. One other important thing that you said, Kimberly, that I just wanted to point out too, that you mentioned the dietary guidelines for Americans and the P through 24. So this is the first time that the dietary guidelines, the dietary guidelines are released by the USDA and HHS every 5 years, and this is the first time that the 2020 guidelines will have the pregnancy guidelines for pregnancy through age 2. And right now, the National Academy of Medicines is doing, the Academies of Medicine has convened a group that is reviewing the process of who is selected, what kind of science is used in that, and I think it's really, really critical. They had a public meeting 2 weeks ago on the 10th of January, and 1,000 Days and Public Citizen and National WIC Association and USBC and Himbana and other organizations gave statements saying that be sure that that you have researchers who know about breastfeeding as an infant feeding as part of this group in the selection process. Keep it transparent. Let us know their conflicts of interest, because like you said with the study, is that if you're being funded, and then also the science that is used, how to do it. So Danae, if you can put a link to that page, just for folks, be engaged in the process and really push that this process is as robust as it can be. It's up to us to make sure that industry and other conflicts of interest are minimal or eliminated in the process, in the selection, in the research, and in the development of the dietary guidelines. So right now, that's happening. Okay, one other question is, how do you, Patricia says, excellent. Can we have your contact information, please, Kimberly? Excellent presentation. Sure. Lots of things for an almost 30 years of an IBCLC to think about and work in my Hawaiian community. So thank you. And I think folks would like your contact address to be able to.
You know what? Kitty, I can't move my slides anymore because there is a contact slide on here, which I didn't get to. I apologize. I should have went all the way through.
Okay, no problem. We will put that. You should be. Can you, click your cursor on that thing? You're still the presenter, so you should be able to do that.
There we go.
Yep. Perfect.
Hold on. Wait, maybe I don't have it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Maybe I don't have it.
We'll put a contact info for you.
Yeah.
Could we
put
your email? Email?
Yeah, please do. ksealsallers@gmail would be awesome. Please stay in touch and let's keep this conversation going.
And another question is, with newer waves of feminists are increasingly becoming more intersectional. They are focusing on race, class, sexuality, disability, and in the research that you did for this book and for all the work that you do, have you seen, just an improvement in how the breastfeeding movement is intersecting with the newer wave of feminism?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been a lots of improvement, and certainly, I wrote a piece for Fortune last week about, I thought there was great progress And I do believe that, the most recent election was a setback in really trying to understand how women do have, where is our solidarity, right? Are we really all on board for intersectionality, or was that a great buzzword that people were attaching to? So I think that, we have to do a gut check about authenticity. I'm very excited about what people are saying and how people are open to the conversation about what has been missing. And so that's really encouraging. But it's going to take some difficult conversations. We can't ignore that the pain that others have felt historically, and we can't assume that now because someone's saying this is important that everybody wants that on both sides, right? And so really, as we if we go back to the spaghetti sauce, we have to think about the variability, right? Like maybe there's intersectionality and maybe there's something else. I don't know what the word is, but we really have to keep moving forward until we find something that can work. But I'm greatly encouraged by what I'm seeing in the field, beyond the field, about really this amazing conversation among women, and I think there's great potential there.
Thank you, Kimberly. And again, to the folks who are on there, I hope you'll download the fact sheets that we have in this, changing landscape in the federal scene. Solidarity is key for women to be talking about issues that intersect, that are common for us, and also making the case with the new administration that this is good for the economy. So again, Dr. Bartik's study of both, outcomes, it will sometimes the money can make a difference as well. So be sure that if this study that was published in November, I think, of pediatric maternal and pediatric health outcomes and associated costs based on the 2012 breastfeeding rates showed that if 90% of infants were breastfed according to our own national guidelines and medical recommendations, $3 million in medical costs and 3 billion, sorry, with a B, in medical costs and 14.2 billion in costs of premature death would be prevented annually. So this is big. This has profound impacts in our communities, on our financial structure as well. So, find any messaging that you can to work and educate and be involved in this process. So again,
I think that's so important what you were saying, Kinney, because I think the idea about messaging is that we can't assume that one message is going to work for everybody. And so really having many things in our messaging toolbox is going to be most important, right? So some people, they're going to be on benefits. Other people, we got to talk about obesity. Some people, we got to go personal and tell them that to help them lose their baby weight faster. Other people, we have to talk about kind of the big food conversation and how this is part of a system. We have to have many messaging tools in our toolkit and understand how to use them all effectively. And that's really why we can't kind of go around with one singular message thinking that it's going to work for everybody. But the more that we can kind of get ourselves rooted in the bigger picture and understand and have these honest conversations with women, then our messaging toolkit will become even stronger.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when can we expect to hear about the work from the first food-friendly communities? Would that be this year? Is one of the questions we're getting.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to be doing, we just wrapped up December 31st, so we finished our 2.5-year pilot. So I'll be sharing, more complete findings at the California Breastfeeding Coalition Summit this week. So I'm excited about that. But really, by the end of, I gotta focus on my reporting. But by the end of March, for sure, we're going to be launching, videos and really blowing out, sharing with the field what we've learned and letting you meet these women that transform their communities in Philadelphia and Detroit. And also just, where we're going to be going back to those communities, we're going to be donating copies of the Big Letdown to them because we really want to create layers of accessible resources, and I find that books haven't been one of them. And so I ask everyone to, participate in making sure that we give women in these communities multiple layers of support. So we're excited about that, and please stay tuned. And I hope that once we have everything done and we have all these stories, that we can come back and share them and really glean the lessons learned from this project, which has just been, life-changing for me.
Fantastic. We will be way tuned in for that, and definitely will be promoting that wide among our network. We have Ileana Berrios, who's saying, I'm in the last stage of developing a CLC scholarship program for Latinas and women of color. It's imperative that more Latinas and Black women are in the field of counseling women. This creates, she is also creating the program that she's developing creates an opportunity for employment. Wonderful. That's wonderful to hear, Ileana. Please keep this conversation going. We have so many comments that are saying, fantastic webinar, so much to learn and so much to process and think about as we reflect on the words and the readings of the passages today. So I'll ask you all to please keep the conversation going in the racial equity discussion forum. This is just the beginning, and I hope that we will be engaging much more on this. So again, on behalf, any closing thoughts, Kimberly, before?
I really would. I wanted to just read you something that I wrote in my acknowledgments because it's so relevant to everyone on this call, and it was really, really important to me because I really just needed to say. So I wrote, books like Breastfeeding require a lot of support. Thankfully, I received so much in so many ways. First, I'd like to thank the tireless breastfeeding advocates who, solely with their passion, skills, and love for mothers and babies, have achieved amazing success against remarkable odds. I applaud you and thank everyone who shared their thoughts, ideas, time, sources, and research with me. This work is yours as much as it is mine. And so that was something that was really important to me, and I really want this to be our work, that, this is our message and getting it out to all women about the letdown around them so that we can help them move past it and we can end it together.
That is fantastic. And Kimberly Seals Allers has the last word today. And thank you again so much. This was phenomenal, and we will keep the conversation going. So thanks to you all for all you do. Look forward to our next session. Goodbye for now.
Right.